what's going on? Joe Carabase here, your host of That Was Yesterday. And on today's episode, we are talking about, I think, one of the most important topics when it comes to transformation, which is addressing self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is an absolute necessity to address if you're ever looking to truly make transformational changes inside and out and to never look back. Sure, you can follow any program in the world and make change to your body. However, if you don't address the underlying internal micro and macro traumas that exist within you and or the ongoing, especially if it's a negative narrative in your head and perceptions of which you see through your situation, you'll find yourself revert right back to where it was when you first started your journey, which, hey, ain't nobody got time for that. Come on now. So today's a really, really important episode. I call this work mental fitness. So it's a combination of being aware of the thoughts that are coming through your head, being able to disassociate yourself from those thoughts. So they are parts of you who have those thoughts. They are not you themselves. In other words, you are not your thoughts. You're the one who are witnessing your thoughts. And so we're going to go a lot more in depth in all of this stuff and give you some actual practical ways to go about your mental fitness that can fit right into your day, that don't require a ton of time. And this is stuff that you can do at home, but you got it. And I talk more about this on today's show, but I want to quickly illustrate the point. Mental fitness, in other words, training your internal mental, emotional state, getting that healthy is just as important, if not more important, than your physical state. They're both important, but they need to be thought of as equal. And they both require fitness, aka training, where you're intentional about it, you're aware of it, and you're doing a little bit every day to make yourself healthier in each of those aspects. And so, very important show. I hope you enjoy it. As always, if you find good value here, please share with friends. So we're going to dive in and talk about self-sabotage today. This is, I think, one of the most important things to address, because so often we fixate on like logical steps to lose weight, logical steps to lose fat, whatever your goal is. We think about, okay, what do I got to eat? How do I got to work out? What do I got to train? Even, we have to find what treatments do I have to do? And look, all of that stuff helps. And it is, of course, important. However, if we don't understand and really identify the internal blocks that perhaps have brought us to this place, behind every weight loss journey, there is a story. There's a story that kind of brought you to that point. Perhaps it was something that happened when you were a child. It could be something that you were told, someone was really mean to you. They would have said something to you once. It could have been an experience you've had in a relationship. It could have been a period of time. It could have been just having kids and what happened after. Like, there are micro and macro traumas that affect us all in a lot of different ways. And most of these ways that they affect us on the subconscious level, meaning we're not necessarily always aware of what those micro and macro traumas have done. And so if they don't get addressed, then they can come up and sort of cause and wreak havoc onto our life whenever we're pursuing things of great importance. And so obviously your health is the most important asset that you have. And so self-sabotage, ironically, wants to kind of keep you where you're at. The mind is comfortable at the status quo. And so anything that threatens that status quo. So oftentimes, a lot of times, especially a lot of work with a lot of people who have battled with weight their entire life. And this might come as a shock, but what you find in almost all of these scenarios is that there's a part of that person, as much as they want change, as much as the pain from being overweight emotionally and physically is really tough and difficult for them to deal with, there's a part of them that feels comfortable being overweight. They identify as being overweight. That's all they've ever known. And so for that person, it truly is a death of an identity for them to lose the weight and to transform, because what does that look like? That's all they've ever known. And so as such, that's where self-sabotage comes into play, in basically doing what it can, the mind's using its various tricks to rationalize, sometimes good excuses, but rationalize things that kind of keep you where you're at and keep you off course so that you stay where you're at. And by the way, this isn't just for people who are staring down a pipe of losing a lot of weight. This is for almost all individuals. I would say if you don't address your internal, that it comes back to haunt you in some way. I see it show up oftentimes with people who are on the other end of the spectrum, people who are very fit, yet no matter what they do, they're just never able to be satisfied with where they're at. They never are able to appreciate all of their progress and appreciate what they see in a mirror. And of course, there's a lot of cases all in between. So I wanted to do this particular episode to address self-sabotage and give you some tangible things for you to be aware of and start to identify within yourself. Now, I call the practice of internal work mental fitness. I've always, as someone who has been in the fitness world for almost 20 years as a professional, I've always found it ironic that even if people who don't work out, they can at least appreciate that like fitness is something that is good for the body, right? I think we all can agree about that. Yet when it comes to the mental, the internal, the mental, emotional, there's just like weird taboo that exists. Now, this barrier I think is starting to break down, but there is this weird taboo that does exist. And I look at the internal for myself, my mental, emotional, just as all of my patients and friends that I help out, as something that needs to be addressed just like the physical body. And so I often refer to this internal work as mental fitness, because if you can identify and believe that you should train your body, isn't it weird that you wouldn't want to focus on training your internal mind, your mental and your emotional? Because after all, that is where all actions either come from or thoughts and consequences of not doing the things that you know to do. Either way, what you do and what you don't do often is a result of what's going on inside your head. So it's a very important topic, and mental fitness is something I think should be a part of your routine, just as exercise should be a part of your routine. Now, I hate to say the word should, because I'll get into that, but obviously, like all these shows, all these talks, take what's useful, leave what's not. I don't want to ever sound like I'm on a soapbox talking down to any one of you guys. That's not the case. Internal work is, it's very much a big part of my life personally, and something that by no stretch of the imagination am I perfect. And to be honest with you, my deep dive into the psychology world and into inner dialogue and voice dialogue, as well as becoming a certified hypnotist, was a result of my own journey of being bullied as a kid and my own struggle with self-confidence over the years. And that led me down this amazing sort of rabbit hole. So that's why I'm so passionate about it as well. So please don't let me, I don't want to come across as like I said, I'm on a soapbox talking down. I'm with you here. Mental fitness is something I practice, and I believe we all should. So I think when we're talking about self-sabotage, the best place to start is what I call ants. Ants are automatic negative thoughts. These are thoughts as to why you shouldn't, why you can't, why now is not a good time, why it's not going to work for you. These automatically appear any single time you're doing anything of great importance. Now, I would challenge you to think back to some time in your life where you did something that was intimidating for you or scary for you. Maybe it was the first day of school back in high school or middle school. Maybe it was getting your driver's license. Maybe it was going to college or your first job or your CPA exam, whatever it was. I know there was something in your life when you first thought about the idea of it, it was intimidating. And you started thinking right away, there was self-doubt. You started thinking about all that could go wrong. And I'm sure there was some fear involved. Let whatever that was from the past be a good example for you moving forward of how you've overcome it and what brought you here today. And sometimes, though, perhaps it didn't go as you wanted to, and it was a really traumatic experience. And in that sense, that's where we want to heal it, right? But the point is that it's really important for you to identify ants when they come up, whether from your past, when you were doing something, if you can think back to when you were starting some initiative, whatever it was, the types of thoughts that you had in your head, or it's just right now with where you're at right now. When you think about a goal that you want to do, the internal dialogue around that goal, if you start to pay close attention to it, you're going to realize that you're almost talking yourself out of it more than you're talking yourself into it. You might find it harder to pursue than not to pursue. These are ants, and they're going to rationalize, and in whatever way it can. It's like a chameleon. It's going to use whatever tactic it can use to get you off track. And just know that it's normal. It's completely normal. It's going to happen no matter what journey you go on to. And no matter how much you practice internal work, it's still going to be there. Internal work is like an onion. The more you just, it's layer after layer after layer. There's no arriving. And I think I'll go off on a little tangent here, but I think that's an issue we have with self-development. I think self-development is a really good thing, but in the self-development world, there's this idea that you should just be positive. You should just be happy. And that's a place that a static place that you can operate in. And that's just not the reality. Life is chaotic by nature. It just is, especially in the world we live in today. And they would be, if it wasn't for dealing with negative circumstances and uncomfortable emotions and difficult situations, you would never be able to appreciate all the things that you love in your life, right? There has to be that polarity of the positive and the negative. And so obviously it's not easy for me, like anybody else in the world, to go through tough times, of course. However, in those tough times, there's a ton of opportunity for self-reflection and self-growth. And I think oftentimes, whenever we've had bad things happen in our life from our past, or perhaps you're going through it right now, these is like a feeding ground for these automatic negative thoughts to sort of pick at. And these ants know they know how to press your buttons. They know what's going to get you riled up. They know what's going to bring you down. They know what's going to get in your way. And again, they're going to take any form they can to get there. So I think right off the get, it's important to realize that, like, for every positive, there has to be a negative. For every benefit, there has to be a drawback. Like, that's just life. If you can have that basic understanding, then you could realize that as you do have these ants come about, like, it's normal. And actually, it's a good thing for you to consider. So often, sometimes we get really excited about something. We don't think about, the challenge of it, or we don't think about what could happen. And so I invite you to not let these ants sort of crawl and walk through your mind and sort of take control, but instead to question them, instead to be aware of them, and to be objective as you can, and sort of question where they came from and what can you learn from them, because that's going to give you a very balanced approach of what's real versus the perception of everything just being bad, or the illusion that everything should just be good. Because if you perceive everything is just bad and that no matter what, you're stuck, and if you keep telling yourself that, you're going to just remain exactly there, stuck, that's obviously not a good thing. And I don't care where you're at on your journey. I can guarantee, and by the way, where you've been in your past, I can guarantee you, and I know this because I've worked with thousands of people and a lot of people who have been through a lot of tough times. I'm talking the worst times that you can imagine, anything from women and rape. I mean, you can just imagine how bad some situations that people have gone through have been. But there is another side of the equation. There is a way, there is something on the other side. And again, this is never to minimize anybody's journey, but it's just to know that no matter where you're at right now, there is the other side. You don't have to remain where you are at all. You have to know that. You have it within, you have the ability within you. And as soon as we can start getting past some of these mental blocks, you will start to notice that more and more. And again, on the other side of things, we don't want to ever walk into a situation and just be like, oh, this is going to be a fantasy. I'm just going to lose 20 pounds in the first week and I'm just going to keep it off for the rest of my life. Or I'm just going to get XYZ surgery. It's going to change everything. I'll have whatever I want to eat the rest of my life. I'll look how I want to look and it'll be good. That's not how anything works. So it's best not to be on either side of the extreme spectrum, but try to be as balanced as you can. And the way to do that is to be aware of what those thoughts that are coming through your head. And so no matter where you're at right now, as you have these ants, these automatic negative thoughts enter your mind, it's really important to identify them and recognize them, that they are these automatic negative thoughts, but journal them out, write them out. What are they? What are they trying to tell you? And the way you sort of quiet them is when you objectively address them, because they lose their power, especially if you speak them or at least write them. I know that sounds silly, but when they're just living in your head, it can seem like that is just the way. That is who you are. This is how things are. Your perception of how you see the world is built from, I should say, the pain of your past oftentimes. And that's all stored in your subconscious. And so the lens of which you see the world through isn't always true reality. And this is very, very important to think about if you're somebody who does self-doubt yourself or put a lot of limitations on yourself or have a lot of negative self-talk. That doesn't mean that you are all those things. It certainly doesn't mean that you're not capable to do what you want to do. All it means is that there's just some internal, either macro or micro traumas that need to be resolved. And once you do, the lenses of which you see through the world are going to change. How you see yourself will change. So the first part is just to be aware of these ands and to start addressing the past. And, a concept, the name of this podcast, a concept that I'm very, very passionate about that's really helped a lot of the patients that I've had the opportunity to work with is to have a kind of twofold approach when you look at your pain from your past. First of all, shine light on it, right? The proverbial monster in the closet. If your kid ever came to you and they were scared that there's something in their closet, there's a monster in your closet, and you go there and there's not a monster. So you turn the light on all calm and the kid sees that there's nothing there but just clothes, and then the kid feels better and they go back to sleep. In a lot of ways, that is what internal pain is. It seems a lot scarier than it actually is. And all you have to do is shine light on it and see it and observe it and reflect on it and be aware of what is currently bothering you, holding you back. And once you do, you realize it's not nearly as bad as you thought it was. I can promise you that. No matter what, it's always worse in our head than it actually was in reality. And the more we can address our pain and our insecurities, our fears around whatever that thing is, the less of a hold it will have on you. So it's both looking at the past objectively, but also looking forward. So oftentimes I tell our patients, whatever it was from the past, let's just say the diets, I talk to so many different amazing people every day they'll tell me in their own way, I have tried everything. I've done every diet in the world. I tried this workout. I tried this surgery. Nothing works for me. Well, I would encourage you this, whatever you tried from the past, it not working, that was yesterday. All the negative internal talk that has brought you down, that has made you feel like you're less than, has made you feel uncomfortable in your own skin, that was yesterday. If you are willing to do this mental fitness, do this internal work. And I know it sounds scary. It's certainly not sexy. I get that. But there's no other way. There's no other way. I oftentimes use the example of a beach ball. If you hold a beach ball, it's like not even a pound. It's the lightest thing ever, right? Now take that beach ball and try to press it down underwater. You're going to experience a ton of resistance. Now you can get it underwater, but you're not going to be able to keep it there very long. And then as long as you do keep it there, you're going to exert a lot of force, a lot of pressure, pushing it down, holding it down to keep it down. It requires constant tension. But at some point, it's going to pop back up with greater force. And this is what we do with our internal pain. Again, from some micro or macro trauma from your past, if it's not addressed, it's requiring a lot of energy to hold it down. Even though we might distract ourselves from it, we might numb ourselves from it, we may not want to think about it. It's there and it's causing in the background. Another example. So I use a lot of examples because I really want you to understand these points. Imagine you had a computer. This is like my wife. She has her browser open with 800 windows. It drives me nuts. But really for a computer, like your CPU, your computer's power is dramatically diminished when you have all of these windows up because it's doing a lot in the background to sustain those windows. So this is the same thing. It's like when you're not addressing the monster in the closet, when you're not addressing that internal pain from your past, it's taking a lot of energy out of you that you may or may not be aware of. So there's something very freeing and liberating in facing whatever it is that's inside. So with the beach ball, in that example of sort of letting it up versus it popping up is really, really important. And the other thing to keep in mind is that you can't avoid it forever. At some point, it's going to come back and haunt you. And what I would suggest to you is that, and I've seen this play out over the last 2 decades of coaching so many different people, is that at some point, so what happens generally, people, let me take a step back and hopefully this will explain it better. A lot of times as a certified hypnotist, a lot of times people will ask me about hypnosis. What is it? Why would I do it? What's important about it? The best way to explain it is if you have a lot of if you, not even a lot, if you have a negative internal, like a thought pattern that's regularly and consistently sort of weighing you down, or external negative patterns, so like regularly gaining weight, not being able to fit into your clothes, or poor eating habits, or something that you're doing physically in the world that is not supporting your goals and not making you feel good. If there's any internal or external negative pattern going on, then that is a sign and a symptom of a pain, micro or macro, from your past that is unresolved. And oftentimes we kind of go through it and we just, we sort of accept it, and we just sort of like take the beating and we keep going forward. But at some point, if it's left unaddressed, that beach ball is going to bounce back with greater force and greater velocity than whatever it was to begin with. Oftentimes the way we react to what happens, I would say almost all times, the way we react to what happens, the way we think about what happened is way worse than what actually happened. Like, there's what happened, but then there's our thoughts and emotions and the story we tell ourselves about what happened. So the sooner you can get to objectivity and to face how you feel about what it is that happened, it will hold less power over you. So the best way to sort of identify the internal and external pain from your past, to start to identify these patterns, is the journal. I know it's not sexy, but literally every night before bed, just pen the paper. And you don't have to read it. You can rip the paper up, but it's very cathartic to just literally fill in the sentence stem. I feel, and whatever you feel, write it out. Or I am mad because. I am sad because. And this is extremely freeing. And what you'll find is, like, no matter how bad it is of whatever it is you're facing, by simply getting it out of your head, you will feel better. And as you do this over and over, you'll be able to identify patterns. And then with that, something I want you to keep telling yourself, keep affirming yourself, is whatever it is, whatever your pain is, whatever your struggle is, whatever your obstacle is, that was yesterday. You have the opportunity today to move forward, or to continue to allow it to weigh you down, to continually press that beach ball underwater. So another element of this self-sabotage talk I think is really important. I'm not going to dive too deep into it because I'm going to have later episodes about it, but I'm a facilitator of voice dialogue. And voice dialogue is basically, it was developed by Hal and Cedar Stone, two psychologists from around the 1970s is when they developed it, where basically they built off a lot of Freud's work and Carl Jung's work within the internal subpersonalities, and particularly Carl Jung's work with the shadows. And what Hal and Cedra found was that within all of us, there are these subpersonalities that exist. And this is something that really resonated with me, because I found once you can understand what your subpersonalities are, you can do what I call mind mapping, which is something I help a lot of my patients with. But nonetheless, and if those of you guys who are defined patients, you can, in the book, Never Look Back, I have a mind map template that you can use to help identify it, because it's really important to understand, like, the parts that are within you that are really active or really inactive. And again, this is like a much bigger discussion, but basically there are sub-personalities that exist within all of us. There are primary parts and there are disowned parts. Primary parts are the ones that are sort of running on autopilot. These are the ones that are sort of taking control of the psyche. They're not you. They are just parts of you. That's a really important distinction. Disowned parts are parts that we at one point labeled as bad, negative, or weak. And if you think of it like a car, the disowned parts we lock in a trunk because we perceive them to be bad. The primary parts are basically running your car. And so the goal, the idea of a lot of this internal work, this mental fitness, is to put you into the driver's seat. To take the primary parts, put them in a back seat, and to take the disowned parts, give them a hug, and put them in a back seat. Because there's no good or bad with these parts. Some of them have sort of some of their behaviors, some of these parts' behaviors, and stay with me. I know this is going to sound really weird for some of you guys who have never heard this stuff before, but just stay with me. But some of these parts can seem like they're quote unquote bad or negative, and they could have caused perhaps some negativity in your life. But I promise you, they mean well. All these parts actually love you. Earlier, we talked about the person who has struggled with weight their entire life. It's a death of an identity for them to lose the weight. Well, that's because a primary part of them is attached to being overweight. That's all that part knows. So truly, for that part, it is a death of identity, because what happens if you get skinny and lean? What happens to that part, right? So these parts are very powerful. And I can tell you, as I do my voice dialogue work, or if I do even my hypnosis, I can see physiological changes when various parts of an individual, of a patient that I'm working with, take hold. Like literally, their posture, their voice, their tone, their facial expressions all change. It's mind blowing. Nonetheless, what we're talking about with parts today in particular is the inner perfectionist and the inner critic. The inner perfectionist is that part of you. Perhaps it's there and perhaps it's not. Some of us have really strong inner perfectionists, some of us not so much. I can tell you that's always been a part that's been very primary in my life, and a part that I'm constantly working up against. And the goal is to work with, right? And that's what I'm getting at in bringing them all together. But the inner perfectionist is really strong, particularly when you're on a weight loss journey. And the way it will sort of come out is that no matter what you're doing, it's not enough or it's not right. Some byproducts of this is to feel like you're not doing enough. So that can cause you to do too much. And by the way, doing too much is a form of self-sabotage. So for example, with a lot of our programs at Define, if someone comes to us, so it comes with all inclusive, all the stuff that you need from eating to exercise, and obviously our holistic interventions that we offer. If somebody came to me and said, hey, I haven't been working out regularly over the last 6 months, while I believe they should work out, I'm a very huge advocate of exercise. I'm not going to tell that person, hey, I need you to start working out 3 days a week right now and all the other changes that I'm going to suggest to you, because that's a lot to take on at once. So what I would say instead is, hey, all right, you haven't worked out consistently. Let's focus on these nutritional things. Give me 45 minutes of walking a week. That could be 3 15-minute walks or 1 45-minute walk. But let's start there. Let's build upon it. The inner perfectionist, though, will then influence people, say, hey, you should be working out 6 days a week. You got to be working out or 4 or 5, whatever's a lot for that person, because it's self-sabotage, because it knows that you're not going to be able to sustain it. It's too much of a delta from where you were to where you want to go. That's too much of a change. It's too much for your brain to sort of like manage. And so ultimately, when things get chaotic in your life, that's going to be the first thing to go is all these extra habits that you picked up. And so it's self-sabotage. So to that, I would encourage all of you guys, if you're on a journey right now, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You don't have to go from 0 to 60. And in fact, going from 0 to 60 can actually be detrimental. So it's better to move at a pace of which fits into your life. I always say it's not what you can do, it's what you can do that you will do consistently. You have to focus on the actions that you can do that you will do. I promise you. And I always talk about short workouts and the effectiveness of those for people. And they think I'm crazy when I talk about 5-minute workouts. They're like, oh, you can't transform in 5-minute workouts. It's like, well, no, you actually can. Not necessarily from just 5 minutes of exercise, but because you're setting yourself up for success. Every one of you listening to this has time for 5 minutes. So you do 5 minutes. It makes you feel good. You'll likely do a little bit more. And because you did that and you felt good, you're going to probably do it again in a few days. And because you did that, you're going to start feeling even better and you're going to want to do more of it. And then it's like the proverbial snowball. Starts really small and then it builds and builds and builds and builds. Versus, hey, I got to get to the gym for an hour. I got to get to the gym for an hour, 3 to 6 days a week. It's like, all right, good luck. Good luck. You haven't worked out 6 days a week. You haven't worked out 6 times in 6 months, but you're going to do that all of a sudden a week, every week moving forward? I don't think so. And I'm not being pessimistic. I'm just being realistic. This is stuff that I've seen live out. And so the inner perfectionist is something to be aware of. And the other part that I want to talk about is the inner critic. And the inner critic is that part that's always in your ear, telling you what you're not doing right, telling you, oh, you look fat. Oh, you look ugly. Oh, your nose. Oh, your teeth. Oh, this. Oh, that. Believe it or not, the inner critic has actually positive intentions. I know that sounds absolutely crazy because they can be really nasty. I know my inner critic is not the nicest person in the world. I don't think anybody's is. But this actually goes back to evolution. When we were tribal people, stuff like shame and the inner critic, these are things that kept us in line so that we stayed in a tribe so that we could survive. Because if you were somebody who just did whatever you want and acted like you're the best thing on earth and you didn't think about other people and you just thought everything about you and what you did was really good, that's going to get you kicked out of a tribe. And if you get kicked out of a tribe back in those days, like I'm talking like early on in civilization, you were doomed, because either you're going to get killed by a predator or another tribe. You needed to kind of stay within the constraints of the community. And to do that, you had to be critical of yourself to some extent, to realize, to have some self-awareness as to how what you were doing fit into the rest of the community. It's not just about you, right? And same thing with shame. Shame is something we don't want to live in at all, but it does have a positive origin, right? So like shame is the idea of like feeling bad about feeling bad. You don't want to do that, especially, ongoing. However, its positive origin is in that if you can identify that you're feeling bad, it's a feeling that you don't want to feel anymore. And that should be a sign of like, okay, I got to course correct here. Something's off, right? So it could be like more of a signal. And so that inner critic, when you hear it coming out, when you hear it beating you down, I just encourage you to smile. Think of it like that insecure little bully, maybe in elementary school. Because by the way, these parts typically are as old now in your head as they were when they entered into your life. And so for so many of us, these parts became primary in our youth. And so they are essentially aspects of our inner child. And that's a whole nother discussion, and a very important one that we're going to address later on in this podcast. I would just want you to think about that there are parts that exist within you. So how you feel, whether as a perfectionist or as an inner critic, realize that it is how you feel, perhaps because it's a part of you that feels that way. It is not who you are. So in other words, if you say something like, I'm fat, I'm lazy, I'm not disciplined, bullshit. I'm calling you bullshit, okay? Those are just parts of you who are that way. That is not who you are. I can't tell you how many parents I've had telling me how lazy they were. I'm like, excuse me, you are full-time providing for a family. You're taking your kids to all these sports. You're working your butt off. There's nothing lazy about you. Just because you're not exercising doesn't mean you're not lazy. So just be careful on that. Realize that like these are just parts of you. They are not who you are. And the more you can understand your parts and start to identify the tendency of the primary parts and the disowned parts, the more you can map your brain and the less influence they'll have over you. Now, these parts are all important. They need to come around for the journey, but they should not be in the driver's seat. So I know that that's a big, big discussion really to be had there, but I just wanted to touch upon it because it coincides with self-sabotage. So a few more things here. One really important thing is expectations. And this, again, is self-sabotage, is when we set up these expectations of what we think we can do in a short amount of time. There's a famous quote that I love. It's like, we often overestimate what we can do in a short period of time, but underestimate what we can do over the course of a long period of time. That is one of the most true quotes I've ever heard. And that, I'll be honest, this is something that I struggle with personally and something I'm constantly working against. But it is so true in weight loss. We want results now. We want them yesterday. We want them as soon as possible. When I say results, we want the scale, baby. We want to see 20 pounds down, and so many of our weight goals that we set oftentimes are these numbers that we have in our head based on no other objective reality other than what it is that we want to be, based on maybe we were that weight a long time ago. And again, not to be pessimistic, but to be realistic, especially if you're a woman dealing with menopause, which is a challenge on your metabolism, is that if you were a weight 20 years ago and you're in the heat of menopause, that goal isn't a good goal right now. Maybe ever, just to be real. Now, that's not to say you can't wear the clothes you used to wear when you were 20 pounds less or whatever it is. It's not to say you can't feel confident, that you can't be more physically active. You can't be all the features of what that weight, of what you were able to do and how you felt at that weight. You can be all those things. I'm simply just saying your weight changes as we age. It changes when you're in college, it changes when you have kids, it changes when you hit menopause, and it changes throughout periods of time throughout your life. And so to fixate on weight just from that alone, it's a false premise. It's a bad idea. Now, to make weight even more of a bad idea, because it is, you can't control your weight. Now you can say, oh, well, if I eat 500 calories less a day, that's 3,500 calories a week. 3,500 calories is 1 pound, so I should lose weight. It's objective. No, it's not. It's not objective, because There's so many things that influence your weight. You can have water retention from something that you ate. You could be holding on to water because you didn't drink enough water, because maybe you were more active one day, or maybe you're just not drinking enough water, or maybe it was a really hot day and the normal water that you drank isn't enough and you're sweating more. There's so many factors with water alone. Then, by the way, the less water you drink, the more you hold on to it because your body needs it, aka the more you bloat. And by the way, the more you hold on to water, the more you hold on to water weight. There's that. The more muscle you have, though, muscle, intracellular water is the water in your muscle. That's a good thing, right? So that's good weight as well. So again, another inaccuracy of it. Or let's say you slept really bad or you didn't sleep at all. Or for my women out there, look, hormone fluctuation, and look, guys have hormone fluctuation too, but menopause really challenges your hormones, right? Pregnancy challenges your hormones. These are things that I feel like, unfortunately, and it's not fair, but it is what it is. Women have to deal with a hell of a lot more than men. That is just a fact, but it is a fact, and it's something we should address that we need to be aware of, right? But hormone fluctuation can lead to weight gain or weight loss. Stress can lead to weight gain and weight loss. There's so many things that factor that is out of your control and really no way for you to accurately measure it. Scale is the worst metric of measurement. So I know I started talking about expectations and got into a little bit of a tangent there, but scaling of what you think your weight, your results should be, that is in line with expectations. And so be careful of what you're expecting. Is it realistic? What I would encourage you is think about where you want to be from a year from today. Dave Ramsey has this really famous question. That's a beautiful question to ask, no matter what it is you're working towards. If we're having this conversation, I'm going to paraphrase, if we're having this conversation a year from today, what has to happen in order for you to feel really good about your results? Because it gets into tangible, objective things that you can focus on to do. And by the way, another important thing that to ask yourself is what it is that you want to feel and what things can you do that will make you feel good, versus wrongly assuming that getting to a certain number on a scale will make you feel good. I got news for you. It won't. I've helped people lose over hundreds of pounds many times. And the thing is, you lose 100 pounds, then what? When you focus just on numbers, it becomes a game. And then you just want to see the scale go down. You know this. If you've ever been on a weight loss journey, if you've measured yourself, you know that it's amazing when you're losing weight. But when you stop losing weight, it's a problem. And so it can really steer you off. Again, it's self-sabotage. So instead, circumference measurements are really good. And I'll be honest with you, circumference measurements by yourself are not good to take. We take that very seriously at the Find to be as accurate as we can with circumference measurements. And even that, there's a standard error. So having someone else do it is ideal versus yourself. But how your clothes fit is the best. And not just how your clothes fit, but where they are right now, where they fit right now. And not that you should wear them every day, you shouldn't. But after doing a very specific type of program for a very specific type of goal in a reasonable amount of time, how do they feel after that? That's another way to track. But some of my favorite things to track is tangible, objective tasks that you can do. You can just do. You can drink half your body weight of water per day. You can move more than you're currently moving right now and set a goal on that. Let's say you're not moving at all. You're not doing any walking. That's okay. So let's start. 10 minutes. Let's do 10 minutes every other day. Let's do 45 minutes a week. Oh, you're already doing that? Great. What's the next level up from that? What's a little bit of an incremental change that can challenge us in a positive way? So these are things that we can track. Journaling, mental fitness. Are you doing it? Right? Here's the thing. Tracking your water, I'm not that you have to food log. I'm not suggesting that. But what I am suggesting is starting, and this brings me into the next final two items of this entire talk, which is that acknowledging all of your efforts is extremely important. Yet what we tend to do is focus on what we don't have, of what we're not doing, instead of all that we are doing. And just think about it. What is your relationship like with somebody in your life where you focus on what they're not doing and you don't focus on what they are doing? Is that relationship a really powerful one? Is it a really good one? Let's be honest, probably not. And look, we all have those relationships. It's hard, especially in work, because why is it so hard? Why do we focus on the negative? Because that's how our brain was designed. Our brain is designed to identify threat. And yes, things in the workplace or even in your own life may not be an imminent threat, life or death. But if it gives us fear, if it's tied into our fear, if it's tied into some level of anxiety, if it's uncomfortable, if there's stress, your brain's going to interpret it as a threat and such that you're going to focus more on the bad than you are the good, because again, it was a survival mechanism for us to focus on bad than good. If our ancestors did not focus on bad, we would not be here. They had to protect themselves. So that same operating system, that animal part of our brain that our ancestors had, that's still present it has not changed, right? It's only been more complicated because of the introduction of social media and the chaos and the hectic, crazy world, fast-paced world that we live in. There's so many things that are coming at us so fast. It's very hard for us to decipher what's real, what's not, what's true, what's not, and to take the time to be objective with our feelings and also objective with how we see other people, truly, versus just focusing on the negative. But that is most true with yourself. So self-love and grace are the final two things that I want to talk about that if you can start practicing will really help prevent you from self-sabotaging. And start by just acknowledging what you're doing. And let's just say you're doing no efforts right now to eat clean. You're doing no efforts right now to change your body. That's okay. You're listening to this. That means you have the intention. And you can't make any action, you can't make any change if you don't have the intention. So you're already in the right direction. And there's always a little bit more than you can do. There's always going to be that. So just focus on what can you do that you will do, right? But let's just imagine that to be true. You're not doing anything tangible to work towards your goals, which I highly doubt if you're listening to this, but let's just say that was true. Well, can you at least acknowledge that whatever brought you to this stage of the game, whatever brought you to how you feel, perhaps whatever brought you to the weight gain, was a byproduct of some challenges that you went through in your life? I mean, whether you had the most perfect childhood, quote unquote perfect, or a very chaotic, crazy childhood, we've all been through shit. You've been through shit, and here you are, still doing your best. So just acknowledge the fact that you're here right now, you have the idea of getting better. That alone is something to celebrate. But beyond that, if you're working your butt off, if you're taking care of your kids, you're taking care of your parents, if you're taking care of friends, like just acknowledge the things that you are doing and just give yourself some credit for it. Trust me, it goes a long way. I oftentimes talk about, I guarantee you remember a coach in your life who was really shitty to you, or maybe a parent or a adult or a teacher or somebody in your life who said something really, really negative to you. But I also bet you recognize and remember someone who did the opposite. And think about the high regard you hold that person who actually lifted you up and gave you that sense of empowerment versus the place of which you hold for the person who did the opposite. And yet, so often, we mirror what that negative influence was onto ourselves. So be aware of that. And then lastly, grace. Grace. Give yourself grace. You're gonna fall off. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Get over it. You're human. Who the hell do you think you are? You thought you could just be perfect? You thought that, you're just gonna be able to do everything perfect. You're gonna feel good. You're gonna feel 100% all the time. You're gonna be able to do all the things that you ever wanted to do. No, why would you think that? What makes you so different than any other human that ever existed? I don't care who it is you look up to in this world. They have their own shit they're working through. I don't care who it is. They all do. We all do. Oftentimes you see a social media slideshow of the positive things, but let me tell you something. I've been around very successful people. In finance, I've been around very successful people in celebrity. I've been around very successful people in the fitness of in terms of people with the most beautiful, quote unquote, perfect bodies. And of course, everybody in between. There's a lot more going on than what you see. So don't compare yourself to someone thinking that they have it easy and you have it so hard. In their own way, we all have our own struggle and our own journey. We're all human and we're all imperfect humans. So give yourself that grace. Start accepting your mistakes, owning them. It's hard. Trust me, I know it's hard. It's something we all struggle with. But realize that it's a part of being human and start to be aware of situations in which you're holding yourself to some impossible standard and give yourself some grace. Thanks for tuning in to That Was Yesterday with me, Joe Carabase. And remember, every step forward is progress. We'll catch you next time. And in the meantime, if you found any value from this episode, please share with friends and go ahead and give us a 5-star review. I appreciate you. Talk to you soon.